Facebook Live this morning. It's nice to appear wherever you are set up. It's one of the wonderful things about this pandemic in that in some ways, we get to meet each other in these sort of intimate spaces, right? Typically on a Sunday morning when we gather together as a congregation, if you're a part of the congregation that I get to serve here in Lafayette, we're in this big formal space and everything's a bit spread out and formal. But in this setting, you and I and anybody else who gathers together literally get to gather in their sort of, your personal space, your intimate space. And today, particularly as we think about, I'm going to reflect a little bit on the capacity of the institution or organized religion to both accommodate diversity and have some capacity for transformation. I'm not sure it has full capacity for transformation, but it has some. I want to think about the institution, but I want to think about that institution is birthed out of the very intimate and personal and sort of inner journeys that we all take. And right now, you're situated in a space that is your space. And your space and your journey and the way in which you construct your own spiritual life, it matters, right? It is the ground of being on which institutions and organizations and even communities are founded. So tending to this moment together, it's important to do. And even for me, right? I need to find a way to draw in enough to kind of connect to my own soul's journey, because it ultimately has some impact on our collective journey and hopefully even on our kind of organized journey if you're a part of a larger kind of institutional reality. So where am I going with all this today? And are you willing to go along for the ride is the question. My hope is today to end. I'm going to tell you where I want to end, and then let's just see if we can get there. Today I want to end with a moment that I call cherry tomato communion. Cherry tomato communion. And I think that moment that I'm going to land in at the very end of our time together today is in some ways facilitated by the long journey that has been shared by so many religious organizations and institutions and all the weight of that reality in which I operate, and maybe many of you operate, and my own kind of personal journey as well. And when those two things play together, cherry tomato communion is possible. Okay? And maybe even in the conversation, you're going to find your own cherry tomato communion as well. Last week, I started out sharing a conversation I had with Bob and Joan. I checked with them and they were happy with me sharing their first names with you today. So I had this great conversation with Bob and Joan. And both Bob and Joan have, in a sense, both lived out their primary way of exploring what Paul Tillich calls the ground of their being, right? The way in which they feel grounded in the world, in relationship to a traditional religious system. For them, it was a church, right? For some people, it'd be a synagogue or a temple or a Zen center. It's been grounded in relationship to this organized body. And for Joan, she discovered along her path that the dominant space within that holding place that was the vehicle that she was using to explore and experience and express her own personal private journey into meaning was this ritual of communion. And I shared a little bit about that last week if you want to go back and revisit that. That idea of communion, not from a theological standpoint of trying to wrap her head and soul around the articulation of what was going on with the meaning of the elements or all of the, kind of incarnational theology that gets argued over around this ritual. But the ritual itself brought her into a space where she felt connected. Connected to kind of like the generational legacy of her own family and maybe even other families that were grounded in this shared truth together, right? So the idea of communion for her was really an invitation into community and to be present for it, and a community that harkened back generations and will probably move forward into generations to come. That was her moment that she found was most meaningful for her in this institution. What is interesting is that Bob also had a relationship with organized religion, but at an early age realized that there was layers of hypocrisy, entitlement, bigotry, little mind thinking that he could not agree with, that grated against his sensitivities as a person who was trying to expand his awareness around the world. And so quickly at an early age, he realized that this institution was sort of hogwash at some level and pretty much just left it behind. But over time, in his relationship with Joan, he also began to see that there was a way to orient to this traditional institution and to be his own creative self within it, right? And he interacted with people who weren't just simply buying the standard pitch that organized religion constructs, but were questioning it and were bringing thoughtful reflection to it, and were asking different kinds of questions, being critical about it. To the point where, for Bob anyway, he was able to come to terms with being in a relationship with organized religion, but also approaching it with his understanding of how the central figure in that tradition operates, particularly in Christianity. For him, it was Jesus, and to see Jesus as sort of a wise mentor, one who allowed him capacity to think about the critical issues of the day from the insights that the teachings and the pathway of Jesus brought to the present moment. And so he could live with this institution, with all of its foibles and faults and even capacity, with this ability to be able to live out his own personal understanding of the way in which his religious journey could unfold inside of the context of this organized religion. And so what I want to do today is sort of honor that is for many people a kind of the way they do it. My parents continue to do it that way. I don't think they would ever think of not being connected to a church somewhere as they think about their spiritual journeys. But it's not the only way, but it's a way I wanted to touch on for today. And if you're a part of a traditional religious system, just to think for a minute about how can you both honor the capacity of that system and also seek its slow transformation. To seek its slow transformation. And the other reason I want to bring that up today is twofold. One is I too have found myself throughout my career and my own personal journey grading against what my tradition continues to try to perpetuate, and thinking that a radical transformation has to happen in congregational life in order for the institution to survive and, frankly, to thrive in our time. And yet, rather than abandon ship and move off and to do something outside of the institution, I've tried to stay within it and bring about that change internally. Not very successfully sometimes, but I have, and others gathered around me too, have made some changes. I think we've made some headway, but not the kind of change that I had hoped for. And my guess is that I stand in the footsteps of people like, well, any transformational agent, right? You just never get where you want to go, but you always keep trying. The second reason is that this week we lost a pioneer in this ability to try to help change the organized religion from the inside, and that was Bishop John Shelby Spong, who passed away this past week. And I've been obviously revisiting some of his sermons and some of his reflections. He too was a wise mentor to me along the way, along with many others who understood Christianity from a completely different vantage point, and yet remained in the institution of the organized church or body, trying to bring about some kind of change or transformation. I can go through a long list of mentors that have been a part of my journey that have all tried to do this. I think of Karen Armstrong, David Galston, Lloyd Gearing, all the professors at my seminary that I went to when I was going to seminary. Many of them were part of what was known as the Missouri Synod. It was a part of a denomination, the Lutheran denomination, but they were realizing that that denomination needed to change the way in which it thought about the scriptures. And they tried to make that change happen within the denomination to the point where they could no longer teach in the seminaries of that denomination, given their perspective. And so they created an alternative seminary called Seminex, Seminary in Exile, and tried to begin a movement, still within the Lutheran tradition, right, to reimagine how to understand the biblical narrative, not as a literal or inerrant word of God, but a living word that took place in a particular context that we then engage to try to engage God's energy in our time, right? So they were trying to do it completely different. And those Seminex professors ended up landing in the seminary that I attended when I was back in the day. So they were mentors to me. Bishop Spong clearly was one of those people. The reason why I want you to, and maybe you could listen to some of Spong's stuff, and I can post one up here that you might find interesting on the feed. One of the reasons why I think Spong is so important is that he was trying to bring about a transformation of kind of church in our time, not by changing stuff around the periphery, right? That's often what you see, right? People will change the music, they'll dress casual like this, they'll they change a lot of the stuff around the surface, but they don't really get to the core of the matter. And Spong understood, and I think it gives you the freedom to realize that you can approach whatever religious system you're in by really doing some critical thinking about the actual core of that thing, the heartbeat of it. And for Spong, he understood that the way in which any religious movement's going to survive, and he wrote a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. So the capacity for a living religious system is linked to its capacity to address the actual lived experience of the moment, right, of the day, of our time and our place in history right now, right? That we can't simply use our religious system as a way to interpret an old worldview and then try to think that that's what we're carrying forward, right? So you're not trying to say, look, let me take a first century worldview and try to maintain that worldview as the world is changing, right? That's a recipe for fundamentalism for disaster, for being irrelevant, for kind of making a system that is sort of stuck in on itself, right? Because it's got to create this like contrived vision of reality, maintain it, and then come up with a solution for it that fits into that old system. Bishop Spong would say, no, I will have none of that. That in order to understand the vibrancy of the wisdom of your religious tradition, you have to also live out of that relationship from the way we understand our world today, from the modern sciences to the cultural issues that we face today, political issues, economic issues, issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. You could go on and on and on. All of that is the matrix out of which the religious experience has to happen, the moment that we're in. Let me give you an example of the way in which Spong does that, and just use the kind of the myth in the first chapter of the biblical book of Genesis, right? If you're familiar with that one. It's that in the beginning, right, God creates the world. And biblical scholars like Spong and many others realize that that is you can look at the story of creation. There's actually two stories of creation, and they're birthed out of the cultural understanding of that time. And it was sort of a mythic story to try to understand where we fit in the world. Out from that story, what we discover is that the humans were like the pinnacle, the peak of the creation. We're like the most important part of the creation. And in a sense, all of the creation is there to house, us. We're like the key figure. Adam and Adamah, Adam and Eve, right? It's all about them. And that's what the story of creation is all about. And even they get to, in a sense, put all the animals and nature in its place. They get to name everything and categorize it. So we're in the control in that scenario, and God, puts it all together and says, this is good thing. And out from that scenario, and you know this story well, Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden, and they break their relationship with God. And so we have what we call this great fall. And we then have fallen into sin or separation. And that mythical story then becomes the theological problem, or the framework in which, and we continue to do this to this day, that we interpret through that lens the life and teachings of Jesus, the great wise mentor of his time, right? And so Jesus has come to put us back in right relationship with God, and that's the objective. Bishop Spong would say, look, it's okay to realize that that was the story that they were using, and that's just one of the stories, but that's a way in which we think about the lens through which they saw the person and work of Jesus, and then crafted the gospel stories that we have today. It all fits into that narrative. But he would say that is not the human condition as we understand it today. We are clearly not the apex of the creation. Rather, we all know that we are a part of the way in which the earth has come into being, right? This biosphere, we are just a player that's birthed out of this explosion of life that emerges on our planet. We're a participant inside of that system, right? That's how we understand ourselves today. You look at the ecological movement today and all the things that are going on. We know that every species in this amazing biodiverse world is interconnected in ways that when species begin to fall away, right, it has this rippling effect in other biospheres. That they're all it's a web of life, right? And we're just part of this great web of life that's slowly evolving and spinning on this little marble in the in our universe. So we get that we're not we're not the unique ones. We're a part of this whole system. And so what Bishop Spong says is if Christianity is going to survive, it's got to look to the teachings of Jesus and whoever the religious figure is at the center of whatever religion you're a part of through that lens, right? What is the wisdom we can take out from the life and teachings of this central figure to understand our situation today? And where Spong lands, just if you're interested, is he says the key for, in his understanding of Jesus, and this is sort of, I think, an intriguing idea, is his capacity to break beyond the ego self or the clan self or the small family self or even the small religious self, and to expand his initial awareness of what it means to be connected to others, so that he begins to dissolve the standing barriers between people in his time, so that he sees in the face of the disenfranchised his own face, his own reflection, right? That they are sister and brother to him. That Jesus is able to see in those who are outside of the religious system that he grew up in, that they too are children of how he understands God, right? They're a part of the whole. And his capacity to embrace and then to live not as, egocentric, but as kind of collective centric, that he gives his life for the world. You can get all the metaphors now picked up in this context. It's really the real gift that he brings to us. And that for Spong, he said, that is the world's future, right? It means that Christianity, in his mind, still has a vibrant message for the world as it is today. If it would just refashion itself, reform itself, transform itself to begin to retell that story for our time. That's its real job. And of course, he was a great advocate for that, and so are many others. Many of the people that I have on my bookshelf were doing exactly that. They were trying to think about the ways in which this religious system that maybe you're a part of could speak meaningfully to the world as we understand it today. And that really is the goal. And that keeps the religion vibrant and alive. Have we accomplished that? I don't know. To theologies, pieties, hymnody, liturgies, all these sort of inside code language conversations that we have with ourselves that is still stuck in the old narrative. And we haven't transformed our thinking or our language or our rituals to match the situation we're in today. And there's a lot of work to do in that. And I as an old clergy person at this point in time, I'm not going to see it in my lifetime for sure. But I long for the day when the fluidity of institutions could respond to the conditions of our time in that kind of, at the level of their DNA, right? Not just an offshoot of it, but their core, it changes, is transformed, right? It's like, maybe you think about it like death and resurrection, if you want to use those religious terms, has to always be a part of even the institution, right? There's things that you got to say, that's just got to die off, and we literally have to live into this new day together. That's got to happen over and over and over again, because the situations and the life circumstances are always going to be changing, of course. So what does it mean for you to be a part of the capacity of wherever community you're a part of to be about change? Well, one, I think like all of these wise mentors in the past, and like you, is to speak your truth inside of that system, right? You don't have to just simply come and regurgitate the language you inherited. You can find your own voice and a new voice in that system. And I will tell you that the system these religious systems tend to accommodate it. And if there's enough of that kind of new language that is swelling up from people who are participants, maybe that could be something that would help us transform more quickly into a way of being vibrantly engaged for the issues of the day. I'm not sure about that, but I think there is some truth to that. So in honor of Bishop Smong today, I just want to kind of have a full sense of gratitude for the work that he and many other men and women in my history and reaching back into history have brought to the table to bring about this transformation. I'm deeply grateful, and I live, on their shoulders in some ways, and so do you. And we need to be thankful for their voices and encourage that we too can add our voices to the ongoing conversation of what this might look like going forward. How does this then, as I close up here, how does this fit into cherry tomato communion? I would say that, and maybe you're like this too, right? I know that my DNA, the ground of my being, has been informed by the tradition that I grew up in. And that the idea of communion has always been a part of that tradition. So I didn't invent that idea, right? I was given that idea as a gift. That I don't, when I was a child, I don't come to this communion experience, which in Christian traditions is a shared meal. I don't get to go up there by myself. I get to commune with others, and as I grew up, realized that communion is a global communion of people, right? I'm part of this network of relationships, and I too share in that network. So for communion, for me, it was this, I inherited that idea from the institution, and it is a beautiful idea of communion or community or the commons, and I get to practice it weekly in this little experience that happens in a lot of churches. But as I try to apply the idea of communion to the world in which I understand it today, it gives me permission to take that ritual and to kind of cross-apply it to a broader understanding or worldview. And it happened to me just the other day. It was an exhausting day. Saturday was an exhausting day. As my wife knows, I was having trouble with tech, and I was doing some work around the house and digging ditches all day, and I was just worn out. And we got to dinner time, and Lori was making, I think it was hummus and tabbouleh or something like that. Anyway, we were doing a Mediterranean meal, and she said, "Hey, why don't you grab some cherry tomatoes for dinner?" And I wander out there, and I can't tell you if I can even remember the last time I picked cherry tomatoes off a vine. But I got out there, and those of you who know this might think this is nothing, but these cherry tomatoes are just exploding on the vine of this plant, right? And as you pick them, there's an odor that is released as if the plant is inviting me into its world. I'm pulling these little cherry tomatoes off, and I'm just super consumed with the task, looking for the ones that are ripe, giving them a little tug, and if they pop off, great. If not, leave them on the vine, right? The vine is flexing and giving as I yank off the tomato and put it in the basket, and then it's releasing this amazing odor, and the birds are singing, and it happened to be one of those days where it was a marbled, cloudy sky a little bit, and all of a sudden, right, I found myself like frozen in time. The perfect way you want to experience communion in the old school days, right? I'm frozen in this moment where I'm a part of something that's so much bigger than myself. and I'm invited into it. It's not like I created it. And I arrived there with a little bowl of cherry tomatoes, and I tell you, that was Holy Communion. I could not have had any better communion experience that day. That was my communion story for the week. That I share that moment with you because I think that is one of the ways you can maybe explore carrying some of the traditional wisdom you've gleaned from your organized religion into the actual moment that we're experiencing right now. Right? Because in that communion moment, I was thinking about my effect on the planet and humans' effect on the planet and sort of our commitment to the natural world and its commitment to us, right? I was being drawn into the larger story of life, just like the communion experience the church was trying to draw you into it. And the realization is that the big separation that we're thinking about, the great sin or disconnect, is our disconnection from the actual natural world that supports us, right? All of that wells up in that moment, and I have this communion moment. You can bring all of that to the present moment, and that becomes a very vibrant, alive, and engaging experience for the now, right? For the now, I'm there in that moment. So I'm going to leave you with that, with a hope that two things. One, you trust me, you can live out whatever you've discovered about yourself during this pandemic, whatever spiritual practices you've figured out, stumbled into during this pandemic, you can bring those back to the collective. And let's, as Portia Tunzi liked to say, let's be each other's curriculum to learn how to move forward. So that's number one. Be that way as we gather together. Number two is carry those, what would you call it, like pearls of wisdom from your tradition into the reality of your everyday and the world in which we're living right now. And allow it to invite you more deeply into the experience and see what that feels like for you. Maybe in such a way we honor all those women and men throughout history who have given their careers and their energy to help inspire and shape the transformation, albeit slow, of the way we collectively think and imagine together. Let's keep that journey going. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today. I wanted to pause, obviously, and kind of do this piece about Bishop Spong because of his passing. Next week, I'm very excited. I had a wonderful conversation with a woman in the community who I think kind of reminded me that there is also another path that's not necessarily so committed to the institution that is available as well. And I was just delighted to have her share her story with me this last week, and I'm going to share some of that wisdom with you when we get together next week. So looking forward to that. Join me next week as we kind of look through the lens that I think will create maybe even some new